Okay, thank you and good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here at the Global Financial Conference. I thank the Korea Business News very much for inviting me. It's a real privilege to be able to address this audience. Over that long perspective, if one looks at the achievements of the Korean economy in particular and the East Asian region in general, they have been quite remarkable. There have been ups and downs since then, but today the world economy is slowing. There's no shortage of scary headlines coming out of countries like Japan, the Eurozone, the US, China, though I should mention that the most recent data to come out of China is more upbeat than what we've been seeing. But there's no question that there is a slowdown in progress. I'm not sure I view it as dramatically as indicated in the opening video, but we should certainly be realistic. We see weakness across the board, especially in trade, manufacturing, and investment. Now, that being said, if you look across many economies, not all, but many, the service sectors are doing better. But overall, growth is slowing, being dragged down by these important tradable sectors. The IMF will release its new projections on Monday. The OECD beat it by a few weeks. They downgraded their forecast of 2019 global growth to 3.3% from 3.5%. And I expect that the IMF numbers, when they come out, will be similar. Madame Lagarde has already indicated that there will be a downgrade. 2016 was a tough year for the global economy. Certainly the first half was, with a severe slowdown in China. And in that year, world growth was 3.2%. Whether 2019 growth will dip below that or not is unclear. In the last few days, there are indications that perhaps growth is bottoming out, but the data, as always, are volatile, and growth is hostage to unpredictable events, many of them, of course, political. Only the US is really growing comfortably above trend of the major economies, for now, that is. And even US growth is forecast to fall in 2019 compared to last year, as some of the stimulative fiscal measures Congress passed in 2017 and 2018, early in 2018, go into reverse. Some of the most worrisome signals come from the bond markets. In this chart, you can see the top blue graph, which shows the 10-year yield on US Treasuries. And it actually began to drop sharply shortly after the US midterm election in early November of 2018. Notwithstanding that, the Fed indicated that interest rates were still on a path to increase in their December statement. They have since reversed course. And quite interestingly, on March 22nd, the spread between the 10-year and the 3-month Treasury liabilities turned negative. This is often viewed as a signal of impending recession. But of course, none of these signals is foolproof. The US is not the only place where anticipated lower growth is pushing down bond yields. As of March 29th, the yield on the German Bund was minus 0.7%. One of the big issues holding the world economy back, in my opinion, is the high level of policy uncertainty. The left-hand chart shows the Baker-Blumen-Davis Index of Policy Uncertainty. It is a news-based index. And you can see that recently it has been at historically elevated levels, even above those reached in the global financial crisis. For China particularly, the degree of policy uncertainty is quite elevated. Naturally, such uncertainty causes demand, particularly investment demand, to fall as investors wait to see what will happen. Where is this uncertainty coming from? It's coming from a number of risks. Some of these are purely on the economic policy front. I don't want to make too sharp a distinction between economics and politics because they're of course related, but the trade tensions that are roiling relationships between the US and virtually all of its trade partners, notably China, are at center stage. One of the most worrisome aspects of the US policy position seems to be a view that most US economic problems come from the outside, whether it is from immigration, whether it is from trade, whether it is from military allies such as Korea and NATO that do not pay their share. This is a very dangerous mindset. Perhaps the one clear domestic foe that the US administration has identified is the Federal Reserve. Monetary policy has loosened in the US. There's been a clear pivot. There have also been pivots elsewhere, notably the European Central Bank. But the Fed is very much under attack from the administration. And that is a situation we have not had overtly for decades in the United States. Looking more broadly, countries around the world have limited policy space to fight the next recession. In many countries, debts and deficits of the government are high. This constrains the policy response. Interest rates are low, even zero, even negative. And so if a new recession should emerge, the response might not be as energetic as might be warranted. I think this is a cloud that indeed hangs over the markets. In such a situation, financial risks that have built up through the period of low interest rates could emerge. One that has been identified by many policymakers is the US leveraged loan market. The minister rightly mentioned the risks to multilateral cooperation, the fact that many mechanisms of multilateral cooperation have broken down or are under attack. The WTO is probably the most prominent, but certainly the meetings of the G20 are not as unified as they were before the new US administration came in. The big question one has is if a new global recession should emerge, where will the global leadership come from? Will the US step up to encourage countries to pitch in, to do what is necessary, or will it take a self-centered view and do what is in its own best interest, leaving the world economy to fend for itself? This is a question mark. Brexit, most obviously. This has been a uncertainty hanging over the European economy for quite some time. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has belatedly recognized the need for a national, multi-partisan approach to the problem, with only a few days left before the EU deadline of April 12th. She faces a lot of dissension within her own party, and the clock is not in the UK's favor. It's also not in the EU's favor because a disorderly Brexit would be harmful, mostly for the British economy, but also for the entire European economy, and possibly also for a broader set of countries that trade with the European Union. So this is a risk we will all have to be watching over the coming days and possibly weeks. More generally, populism, nationalism is guiding politics in more and more countries. It's not just in Europe, it's also in Mexico, in Brazil. You can see glimmerings of different types of populism, even in some East Asian countries. And the implications of this for economic policies and for multilateral cooperation are very worrisome. Populism is driven to some degree by a deficit of trust in established elites, and that, even where it is warranted, tends to undermine the possibility of enlightened, evidence-based policy. So this I view as a major risk. Let me talk a little bit about East Asia. The chart on the right shows some IMF growth data and projections through 2023. Growth in East Asia will not recover to pre-crisis levels when the global economy was awash in liquidity and booming. China is bound to slow, bound to converge, as it has been. The last People's Congress lowered the target range for Chinese growth to between 6 and 6.5%. And China will have a dominant regional effect and also a global effect as it inevitably slows. The question is, will this slowdown be gradual and based on higher quality growth, or will there be some sort of hard landing in the cards? China faces some serious economic challenges. There are the trade tensions with the United States. There's been much press recently about how close China and the US are getting. Stock markets have rallied. I personally don't put a lot of weight on that because I feel that the hardest issues have not been dealt with, and there is an incentive for the US to declare victory, have a big ceremony involving President Xi, President Trump, show that Chinese soybean imports from the US have lowered the bilateral deficit, and present those as achievements for the 2020 election. But do not be fooled. The questions are very difficult. Let me end by talking about some upsides. When I was at the IMF, we would always run through the downside risks for the global economy, and then I would always be asked, well, have you got any upsides? And I have to admit there were times when it was hard to think of them. But let me talk about some upsides, admitting that they are not highly probable, but they will give you a hint of where we could be going compared to where we are. So imagine these scenarios. North Korea agrees to denuclearize, it opens up more, it follows the path of Vietnam with powerful growth effects on South Korea and the entire Asian region. The United States returns to a multilateral cooperative stance. It joins the CPTPP. It allies with advanced and emerging economies in successful reform of the World Trade Organization, which certainly needs a number of reforms, not least of which to handle the issues that China raises. Trade disputes with China are diffused as a result of multilateral consultation with the country, and China reinvigorates its support for the private sector. It opens up more, it strengthens its governance. The tie I am wearing, I bought in the Incheon airport a couple of years ago, and the minister's remarks about the adaptability over the centuries of the dragonfly really hit home because it is a dragonfly tie. So I hope that the world economy can imitate the dragonfly and attain some of these upsides in coming years. I'll stop there.